Test, test, test. All right, hopefully this volume is good. Hi, I'm George. I'm going to be using this image. I'm reading a book. It is called On the Mission in Missouri, 1857 to 1868 by John Joseph Hogan. On Mission in Missouri, Chapter 1, Missionary Opportunity. Is that mic close enough? Move a little closer. On Mission in Missouri, Chapter 1, Missionary Opportunity. In June 1857, the most revered Peter Richard Kenrick, Archbishop of St. Louis, yielding to my repeated request to be relieved from city parochial duty, accepted my resignation of St. Michael's Parish in St. Louis, and appointed thereto the Very Reverend Patrick A. Feehan, late president of the Theological Seminary at Carondelet, and at present Archbishop of Chicago. This gave me what I was looking for, an opportunity to go into the interior of North Missouri, where there was no priest, and there build a chapel or two as nucleuses of congregations. My purpose proposed to His Grace the Archbishop of St. Louis received his sanction so far that I was at liberty to go into the country and see it first. Outward bound. I turned my face towards North Missouri. The North Missouri Railroad was then open for passenger business to Warrenton. West of Warrenton, many men were at work, leveling hills, filling hollows, building culverts, erecting bridges. It was a busy scene. Along the line, work was hotly plied. Along the line, work was hotly plied. I approached one of the contractors with whom I was acquainted and asked him to lend me a horse to ride on my intended journey, the purpose of which I explained to him. He replied, "Reverend Father, the horses I have are these you see. They are cart horses, not good to ride, but if you accept one, you are welcome and you can have your choice. The bridle and saddle I have are worn and soiled, jog-trotting hereabout. They are the best I can offer you, and you may take them with pleasure." Mounted. I soon mounted. With a pleasing and grateful goodbye to my benefactor the contractor, I set out, keeping the main road that led to the prairies of North Missouri. The weather was hot, being then the last days of July. I passed through Montgomery, Audrain, and Randolph counties. From Allen into Randolph County, where on the 4th of August I instructed and baptized 2 grown persons. I proceeded northward into Macon County and thence westwards toward Chariton River. As I was crossing the Chariton Swamp, a wide stretch of alluvial lands on the confines of Macon and Lynn counties, I was overtaken by a well-dressed young man mounted on an elegant horse in bright new trappings. All right, let's see here. We need to move over because we've gone quite a ways. That was quick. Lynn County is there. Can I zoom out? No. Predicting. Checking the speed of his steed, he saluted me, inquiring my name, where I was from, and on what purpose journeying. I gave him my name and told him I was a Catholic priest seeking a location for a church in these parts. He said, "There are no Catholics here. What then is the use for a church?" Seeing he was prejudiced and displeased with my purpose, I replied, "True, sir, there are no Catholics here now, but they will be here before long, and you and I may live to see the day when there will be a Catholic church on every hill around here." "Yes," said he, "when the Chariton goes upstream, goodbye." Spurring his horse, he rode quickly ahead. Having crossed the Chariton Swamp and gained the high lands on the west side, I allowed my horse to graze along the road whilst I recited the divine office. Afterwards I rode on some miles, and towards evening stopped for the night at a farmhouse on the stage road leading towards Linnaeus, Mulhollandists and Murphyites. Hearing of a disturbance going on a few miles distant on the line of the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, I determined to go there. I found contractor Mulholland with about 100 men encamped on the hills on the east side of the Muscle Fork of Chariton River. On the hills on the west side of the same stream, contractor Murphy was similarly encamped with fully as many men. Both camps had sentinels posted along their fronts. To the right and left of the camps were the shanties of the warriors in which their wives and children were crouching in terror. Surveying the situation, I resolved to enter one camp first and then another, and by passing from camp to camp, to bring both parties to terms. My ultimatum being that they should stop drinking and retire in peace to their homes. Before long, all were at home or at their work again. I stayed there some days, cementing anew the friendship that was disrupted but for the moment, and that I afterwards learned continued firm and lasting. Camp Garrowin. Resuming my journey, I rode through the counties of Lynn and Livingston, not following any particular road and crossing the rivers where I found them fordable. On the evening of August 11th, I dismounted at the door of the little hotel in Utica in Livingston County, where I stayed for the night. Having seen that my horse was properly stabled and fed, Next morning, as my horse was tired, though by no means jaded, I left him in the stable to rest and hired a fresh horse, on which I rode that day still further westward into the high open prairies of Caldwell County, which I made the turning point of my journey. Returning eastward, I stopped for the night near where Breckenridge now is, at a place then called Garryowen, the camp of Griffin and Shea, railroad contractors from Madison, Indiana, who with a band of good sober men were at work on the grade of the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad. There on the evening of August 12th, I baptized 2 children of the pious edifying railroad community. Gary Owen and Billy Griffin had so many attractions for me, and were so intimately associated, in name at least, with places and persons dear to me since childhood, that I stayed there, though aside from the purpose of my journey, a day and night longer. Early in the morning, Friday, August 14th, the vigil of the Feast of the Assumption, I set out from Garryowen to Utica, where, having dismissed the hired horse and taken my own again into service, I rode 45 miles without rest or refreshment. The whole distance traveled that sultry day on horseback, by way of Utica, the Blue Mounds, and Compton's Ferry, from Breckenridge to Brunswick, being 55 miles. Packet Spread Eagle. Arriving at Brunswick, I heard the whistle of a steamboat descending the river, making signals for landing. It was the Packet Spread Eagle, Captain Labarge, bound for St. Louis with the miscellaneous cargo of Upper Missouri staples: hemp, tobacco, flour, pork, cattle, mules, horses, darkies. My destination was Boonville, from Brunswick, 80 miles downstream, where there was a Catholic church, the only one within the region of my journey so far through North Missouri, and whither I was hastening. To say Mass on the following day, the Feast of the Assumption. The night was very hot. Mosquitoes buzzed around in swarms and were unrelenting in their attacks, so that sleep was impossible. Landing after landing was made in good time. New Frankfort, Glasgow, Arrow Rock were called in succession, and arrivals and departures made without delay, the river being then at high water, but not over its banks. Slavery in Missouri. The darkies, of whom there were about 50 on board, all athletic men, suffered many cruel hardships. Their keepers, a few armed men, held them chained together in squads, so as to hinder them from getting away at landing places. At night, formed into line, shoulder to shoulder, their faces turned one way, manacled with iron handcuffs, man to man, they were made to lie down on their backs on the boiler deck of the boat, without pillow, mattress, or covering, a position they could not change for one instant during the whole night, not even so much as to lie on one side. The groans of the poor fellows as they clanked their manacled hands against the deck, or dragged and slashed in pain their booted heels on the rough boards on which they lay, were truly heartrending. They were accused of no crime, were torn away without a minute's notice from their homes, husbands separated from wives and children, sons separated from parents, brothers, and sisters. All were forced to leave dear friends and loved scenes behind them. Love of money caused it all. Traders had brought them and were taking them to trade them again, and for a much higher price, in the slave marts of St. Louis and New Orleans. 7 years before, when a student of the Theological Seminary of St. Louis, the task was given to me to write an essay on liberty, which, like all such essays, was to be read and criticized before the rhetoric class. My subject led me to make some comments on Negro slavery, and somewhat in the strains of Thomas More and Daniel O'Connell on the same subject. Young man, said the professor to me, I have nothing to say to you on the merit of your essay but this. When you go on the mission, if you give expression to sentiments such as these, you will be driven from the home decorated with a coat of tar and feathers, and fortunate you will be if nothing worse befalls you. Slavery's better side. But slavery had a better side. The poor Negroes had many virtues and a gentleness of character altogether their own. Never in my acquaintance with them were they disrespectful or offensive to me, or to any one else, so far as I could see. When on the mission at Old Mines in Washington County in 1852 and 1853, I taught a class of about 40 Negroes their catechism day after day for several months, preparing them for First Communion. Their progress being quite satisfactory and their behavior a pleasure to me. The Negro Catholics of that congregation, and they were many, were devoted to the church. The young men and young women, though not able to read or write, being debarred from such knowledge by statute, had nevertheless learned by heart the Gloria and Credo of the Mass, and several psalms and hymns which they heard in the church, and which they took delight in singing as they followed the plough in the fields, or enjoyed the pleasures of home by their humble firesides. Their masters did not engage in the business of buying and selling slaves, hiring them out for payment, or separating wife from husband or parents from children. They employed them on the farm to make a support for themselves and for those under whose They employed them on the farm to make a support for themselves and for those under whose care they were, and to whom they were oftener some of these words are kind of archaic, oftener a burthen than a benefit. Now word burden. I'll try to keep my commentary to the minimum. The black and white families went to the same church together. They lived in friendship and in neighborship, mutually aiding and depending on each other. The same parish priest ministered to their spiritual wants. The same family physician attended them in their ailments. They lived for each other, died near each other, and were buried near each other. The massa and the missus, and faithful servants, choosing in death as in life not to be separated, surely before the holy altar of the one God, master of all, and under the sacred influence of humanity divinely redeemed, there was and could be neither bond nor free. The church knew how to heal the bruises of the slave, and to soften the severity of the master. And had her influence been allowed to prevail, it would have saved us from a calamity now and forever to be deplored, and which neither blood nor tears can ever erase from the pages of our history. Like Rachel, the church is ever to mourn and without consolation her children's misfortunes, usually none other than the dire results of selfish greed and atrocious political strife. Hibernians and Jaegers. Arriving at Boonville during the night, I went early in the morning to the church, expecting to find the pastor, the Reverend Father Hillner, and with his permission to have the consolation of celebrating Mass. But Father Hillner was away on some distant mission and had taken with him the only chalice and vestments that the poor little church possessed. Having heard Mass in spirit before the lonely little altar, I was leaving the church when someone informed me that many people of the place had left there very early in the morning, headed by a military company with muskets and cannon, marching for Otterville, 30 miles distant, to quell a riot which had arisen between some railroad men at that place. The painful news considered, I thought it my duty to go to Otterville without delay. Leaving my horse in the livery barn to rest, I hired a fresh one that was soon harnessed to a good buggy, and once again going, it was now about midday. I passed over the distance in 5 hours, happily to find Otterville in peace and that there had been no riot at all, or at most, only a noisy scuffle between some few who had been drinking. The Jaegers from Boonville had got in ahead of me, and having formed line of battle, charged on the Irish camp, which was down in the woods by the banks of the Limine River. The Irishmen, not dreaming of such an attack, and not knowing what it was all about, took to their heels, the Jaegers after them. Soon two men who had thrown away their hats and coats in the fight were overtaken. These had not been in the melee at all, but were nevertheless corralled. Over them, volley after volley of cannon and musketry was fired amid shouts of triumph. It was a great victory for the Jaegers, and to celebrate it they soon fell to drinking. Kegs of beer that had been emptied rolled about over the green, and had the Hibernians had a sagacious leader, they could have faced about and captured their captors. Laughing heartily at the ludicrous adventure, yet much displeased with myself for having traveled so far to see it, I set about getting supper for myself and horse, after which I was soon again on the road for Boonville, where I arrived about midnight. Not willing to entrust the care of the horse that I had found to be a good one to the care of even his owner, who might possibly overfeed him, I remained 2 hours with him, acting hostler myself. Next morning, returning to the stable, I was quite pleased to find the horse well and seemingly fresh for another war adventure. Of his owner, I inquired how much I owed him. $3, he replied. It is cheap, said I. Here are $6 for you. You own a good horse, and he has earned his wages well. Homeward bound. Spending a lonesome Sunday in Boonville without possibility of celebrating or hearing Mass, I watched continually for a downriver boat, which came along at last during the night. Embarking with my horse, I was once more afloat on the rushing waters of the muddy Missouri, heading for St. Louis, homeward bound. Next day we touched at Jefferson City and many other places, taking and putting off freight and passengers. Towards evening we made landing at Herman. Afterwards, of the opposite shore the boat whistled, rounded to and ran about its gangways. It was landed with my horse above the head of Loutre Island. From there I traveled in the early hours of night, 16 miles northeastward, arriving at Warrenton too late to call on my benefactor. Next morning, however, I called on him and found him as I was myself, quite well and in a smiling mood. I was glad to return his horse to him, and he was equally glad to find him lively and in good condition. Having given from my heart and in God's name a blessing to my benefactor, which he humbly asked and would accept nothing else from me, I set out for St. Louis, losing no time on arriving there to present myself before His Grace the Archbishop. Northwest Passage. Favored with an audience, I related to His Grace what I had seen, that North Missouri was a beautiful country, but a land unknown to the Church, and that if he would give me his permission and blessing, I would, with God's help, attempt to make a beginning there that might grow in the course of time. I ventured to tell him that as Captain McClure had then recently found a northwest passage from the Atlantic to the Arctic Ocean, so a northwest passage for the church by a line of missions bordering on each other from St. Louis to Omaha could not seem difficult to a missionary willing to make the effort. 2 days later, His Grace called on me at St. Michael's Church, my former home, where I was staying for the time being. I would not think, he said, of sending you out to North Missouri on that mission, but since you are willing to undertake it, you may do so in God's name. I give you these light missionary vestments with portable chalice and altar stone. They are from my own private chapel. I hope you will succeed in your undertaking, but if you ever wish to return to the city, I will give you your parish back, or one as good in place of it. Having warmly thanked His Grace, I reverently knelt to receive his blessing and immediately withdrew from the audience chamber. Chapter 2. A duty sanctioned. The work to be done, the nature of which my recent journey gave me some knowledge of, and the responsibility for it since I had undertaken it and solicited for it the sanction of the ordinary of the diocese, made me apprehensive I should fail. To withdraw was too late. To go on was a duty sanctioned. Failure, if it should follow, I could bear, the cause being a good one. Above all, I needed the divine assistance. This I humbly invoked by a short retreat. Appointing the 8th of September for the initial date of my enterprise, I entrusted it and myself to the patronage of the Mother of God, whose nativity was ever the harbinger of blessings to come. Friendship's pleading. But there were difficulties yet in the way. They came from dear friends who regarded the undertaking as visionary. A devoted priest, a particular friend of mine, insisted on holding out against me to the last. Shouldering me back at every street corner on the way to the rail department, he almost violently resisted me on getting on the cars. I got aboard the train, however, and was soon on my way from the 14th Street Depot in St. Louis to Jefferson City, the western terminus at that time of the Missouri Pacific Railroad. From Jefferson City I went by steamboat to Brunswick, and from Brunswick by a hired stage to Center Point, a new town on paper in Lynn County, on the east fork of the Yellow Creek, confidently supposed, on account of its central location, to become the great central town of northwest Missouri, on the railway then building from Hannibal to St. Joseph. Humors of Center Point. Beside what was on paper, the town of Center Point had actually one house on the ground, a one-story, two-room shed, sides, floor, and roof of cottonwood rough boards, but without plastering or weatherboarding, and used for a store. The merchant proprietor, whose stock in trade consisted of a few boxes of boots and shoes and some bundles of ready-made clothing, had failed in business, not having had customers. Under the influence of the speculative fever that gave the place a name, I rented the wooden shed from the man who had come to be a failure. One of the rooms I converted into a chapel, the other into a study. Board I engaged at a neighboring farmhouse. My congregation consisted of a few railroad laborers living in shanties nearby. On Sunday I had a crowd from the backwoods to see the priest. A telling sermon. My sermon had the happy effect of procuring for me an invitation from one of my hearers, but of a different faith from mine, and for supper as I understood him. I accepted the invitation with pleasure, and in due time, as the evening came on apace, I found my way following the directions given me to reach his house. Soon I was hospitably treated to a plentiful supply of squashes and watermelons, spread out on the puncheon floor of the log mansion of my host, who did the honors of the occasion by cleaving the huge vegetables before us into lumps and slices with a piece of a scythe, the heel of which, straightened, had been set into a stout wooden handle. If there were any dishes or knives or forks in the mansion, they were not called into use, the etiquette in vogue at time, as I supposed, not requiring them. I returned to the chapel, philosophizing on the wonderful fruitfulness of the land of promise into which I had come, of which I was now an inhabitant, and where other surprises were awaiting me. Social enjoyment. The house I rented stood upon wooden blocks, the floor being about 2 feet from above the ground. The space underneath the floor, hollowed out to some depth and partly filled with stagnant water, afforded a delightful retreat to the hogs of the neighboring farms, on their frequent sallies into town on pleasure bent. Having recited my office and said my beads, I was in happy anticipation of peaceful slumber, when my attention was aroused by a fresh accession of visitors to the underground story, who seemed to come rather as invaders than as friends to the parties in possession. Soon a more than usual racket of biting, squealing, and grunting went on, which, together with the unbearable odor of the place, had an unnerving effect on me. Yet I might possibly have held the fort and been victor in the end, had not a new and unexpected attack in force been made on me. The master hog of the place, a huge fellow, adjusting his itchy back to the floor under my feet, his bristles sticking up between the boards, gave me and my little chapel such a rocking and shaking that I thought the end of the world had come. Realizing that the abomination of desolation was in the holy place, I fled not to the mountains, for they were not near, but into the woods which were close by. How I spent the wearisome night I do not know. In the morning, however, feeling that there was yet a little life in me, I went meek and humble to the poor railroad men and told them my sad story. They pitied me very much, and forthwith went to work and built a log shanty for me, so that I was soon domiciled amongst them. The priest's shanty was almost 12 feet square, built of unhewn sticks and limbs of trees laid over each other for walls, to a height of about 8 feet. The openings were made in the wooden walls for a door and window, which, as likewise the floor and roof, were of undressed plank from a neighboring sawmill. Bedstead, table, and chairs were of like fashion and material. I taught catechism and said the rosary and night prayers in the shanty, where also I entertained visitors who were not a few, whether on business or curiosity. I was a favorite with the railroad civil engineers, a pleasant class of gentlemen who often came late at night seeking shelter under the community roof, as there was no hotel in town. Excuse me, I need a drink. The difficulty was not overwhelming when my friends came one at a time, which was seldom, but when they came in twos and threes, as was usually the case, and not being able to solve the hotel problem of putting 12 guests into 11 rooms, and giving each of them a room, the readier method was adopted, of giving them up heads and points to Morpheus, whatever that means. Gradually, under careful consideration of the situation, I became suspicious of Center Point. My ideas, brightened by experience, began to lead me to think that Center Point, which was not much of a place, was not to be the center point, as in fact it never came to be, the coveted destiny being in abeyance for Brookfield, the center point to come. John the Baptist. Keeping my convictions to myself, I asked and got the loan of a horse from Mr. Patrick Toohey, a good-hearted Irishman, a Catholic, a contractor on the railroad. The horse I give you, he said, seems to have been intended for you. His name is John, as I know. Your patron saint is very likely St. John the Baptist. This horse is John the Baptist. He was so called by his late owner, of whom I bought him, a Baptist preacher in these backwoods here. I felt a shudder at the irreverence of calling an animal by so sacred a name, and yet that name gave me fresh courage. I felt that my heavenly patron, St. John the Baptist, whom I had followed in a measure into the wilderness, would lead me to some place where I could do some good. At the end of a day's journey, devoid of definite purpose, I found myself entering a delightful little town, charmingly situated in an open prairie surrounded by woods. It was Chillicothe, a place of about 1,000 inhabitants. Chillicothe. I put up at the City Hotel, the only hostelry in town. It was a dark-painted, dust-covered, small-frame building with a shaky little porch over the front, but it was an important place. All the great four-horse mail stages, the boudoir Pullman coaches of the West in those days, made it headquarters for receiving and dismissing passengers, loading and unloading mail and express, and changing horses, and great was the gaping crowd of unkempt urchins and rustic citizens in homespun that greeted each stage arrival. Next day, after careful observation and inquiry, but without disclosing my character or missionary purpose, I found that the townspeople, white and black, were mostly Kentuckians, and that the prevailing religions and that the prevailing religious beliefs were Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, and Campbellite. I don't know what Campbellite is. Each having a separate church, which was more or less aristocratic membership and pervading influence. It was well known, however, that there was one Catholic in town, a lady of education, refined manners, and retiring disposition, the wife of a non-Catholic, a prominent lawyer, the family being favorably spoken of. A congregation of one. I lost no time presenting myself to my congregation, this said lady, who received me courteously and introduced me to her husband and children. I was invited by her to say Mass at her house, which I did on the following day. She and her children assisted at Mass, at which, having prepared herself by confession, she received Holy Communion. The children, too, were soon baptized, those of them of age to learn, having been taught the prayers and catechism by their pious mother. But the good family was in great pecuniary straits at the time. The lawyer's business was not proving lucrative in so new and backward a place. He was obliged to mortgage his residence, and the mortgage overdue was about to be foreclosed. I was earnestly besought to save the family, if in my power to do so, from being turned out homeless in the street. After some consideration, I did not see how I could do not what was in my power in such a case. The sum needed did not much exceed $200, but that amount would take the last dollar I could command. The mortgage was lifted. The providential relief of a distressed worthy family opened for me a chapel and a temporary home, though a poor one. The husband became a good Catholic. The children grew up pious and good, and one of them became a sister of charity. The church did not suffer, although the few dollars given away were much needed to help so poor a foundation. The priest in town. When it became known that there was a priest in town, great was the curiosity to see him. It was supposed he should be an elderly man of grave, austere appearance. Some who had seen him said he was a young man and by no means austere. Strangers, young and old, who entered the town were eyed closely as they passed by. Several averred that a showman entering town clad in fine raiment and riding a dappled white and bay horse was mistaken for the priest. The priest, however, could not long keep himself within the cloud. When he came to be known, he was found to be a tall, thin man, wearing plain black travel-stained clothes, and his horse was not a dappled, prancing steed, but a plain little sorrel pacer. The next craze was to see the priest in his vestments and to hear what he had to say. As there was no Catholic church in town, the surmises were various as to which of the Protestant churches he would exhibit himself. Looks like it says in. This is a very old book, and it's a photocopy of a book. So bear with me. Protestant churches would be exhibited himself in. The non-Catholics, however, took care that he should not get none of their churches, and they were not without having been asked, but not by the priest, for the favor. Ed Darlington, editor of an able and very independent little paper then published at Chillicothe, had much to say of the preachers and in no very complimentary strain on the subject of their refusal. And to show them that the priest did not stand in need of their churches, he got the use of the courthouse and had it cleaned and fitted up for the priest to lecture in. He, moreover, attended the priest's lectures and liberally advertised them free of charge. At the close of the lectures, which were continued every evening for a week, John Graves, the oldest citizen and the first settler in the town, donated a lot to the priest to build a church on. The lot was surveyed and staked out by George H. Nettleton, the eminent citizen and great railroad president and manager, then a young man of prepossessing manners, appearance, and address, a division engineer of the construction of the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, and for the moment engaged in laying out John Graves' urban farm into streets and town lots. Chapter 3. Let me check to make sure this is still going. My screen went dark. It appears to still be recording. We're at 31 minutes. That's 2 chapters. I'm going to stop here. Alright, so here's the book. It's just a photocopy. So it's an old photocopy. It says you're holding a reproduction of the original work that is the public domain of the United States of America and possibly other countries. You may freely copy and distribute this work as no entity, individual, or corporate has a copyright on the body of the work. This book may contain prior copyright references and library stamps, as most of these works were scanned from library copies. These have been scanned and retained as part of the historical artifact. So that's the book. And I am sitting in the town of Chillicothe, which is the town where he was given the lot, and I attend church at that church. It's very beautiful. So that's all for now. I will read more later. And this is mainly for me. This is a borrowed book from the priest of my parish, so I need to return it to him, and I want to be able to hear it again, so I'm recording it so that I may listen. And if anyone else finds benefit, great. So that's it. Thanks, and bye.